Hey everyone, welcome back, AI enthusiasts. Today, we're delving into the exciting world of AI product creation with a true industry veteran. Joining us today is a renewed digital and AI product expert and a serial entrepreneur. We'll be exploring the unique challenges and opportunities presented with AI products, along with invaluable management tips for navigating this dynamic landscape. Get ready to be for an insightful talk with an expert with true AI pioneer advice. Let's start. How are you, Somnath? How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. As we were talking, it's bright and sunny in London, so I'm extra good today. But
Oh,
it's a
I'm so
pleasure to be
happy
here.
that you're here. Somnath Biswas is an AI product leader and entrepreneur, and I'm so happy that he's here with us. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions. And now we can start. What are the key differences between managing traditional, regular digital products and AI-powered products?
Okay. So I kind of I was thinking that this question might come up. So I was kind of reading a couple of articles, and most of them start off with the AI product manager needs to have a technical background, and I'm actually going to go against uh, the popular opinion over here and present a different view. So let's take a step back on this one. So this probably was true a couple of years back when anytime we are talking about AI, it is to do with model building or very custom models being built. And even at that point, it probably was still not 100% true because you're largely relying on the data scientists to do the job. In my world, the way I kind of do my product management is the product manager is responsible for the what and the why. And then you have your colleagues in engineering and data science who are responsible for the how and the when. So, from a product perspective, it's not essential. I would say it's not essential that someone needs to know which algorithm or which model or what to do. That is where you rely on your data science colleagues. So, I would say the technical know how is not a must have for a product owner. More so in today's world, where you actually have the likes of Hugging Face and you have a number of these platforms available where models exist. So, no one ideally it's probably in a very rare scenario that people are actually building up things from the scratch. Most of the time, you're kind of probably fine tuning models. So, in my mind, the one myth to dispel, so to speak, would be that you don't need the technical know-how. What you need is a clear understanding of should I go for AI? Um,
Right?
because today, unfortunately, what has become is that everyone wants to try and build an AI product. The know-how helps to see, okay, am I building a classification? Is my product need to classify, or is my need to do any kind of prediction? So that's where you go for classification, regression, the supervised learning kind of models. Am I trying to do any kind of, is my product need to cluster certain data points? That's when you're kind of going for the unsupervised models. Is my need to kind of go in for pure, the language models, the neural network, the deep learning kind of models? But by and large, you are less worried about whether it's supervised, unsupervised, or whether it's basically deep learning model. You as a product owner need to know, do I need to classify? Do I need to predict something? Do I need to cluster? That's your guidance. And then you go to the data scientist and say, this is what I'm looking for. He or she or they at that point of time would effectively then come up with the right solution. What you also need is to specify that there's if anyone's kind of familiar with AI, there's the confusion metrics in terms of the false positives, false negatives, and the true positive, true negatives. What you need to specify to the data scientist is, hey, I can't really take a risk with this, so I want a high recall. Recall being, of all the things that you should have captured, you're capturing all of them, or you're capturing how many of you captured. So
Like the coverage.
yeah, the coverage. So you're basically, if you're risk averse, so for instance, if you're kind of trying to build something which is for compliance, you'd rather live with a false positive than go for a false negative. So you're basically saying, okay, give me high recall, I am less worried about precision. Other use cases, you're basically saying, hey, you know what, I cannot afford to misclassify something, so therefore I need a high precision. So that's the kind of know-how that you need as an AI product manager in today's world. You don't need to know whether it's the nearest neighbor or a random forest or those kind of things. And I see people saying, hey, for an AI product manager, you need to kind of have understanding of Python, etc. No, it's the equivalent of, in the previous world, a product manager never went and said, hey, you need to use these Python libraries to build this software for me. That was always the engineer's role. So over here also, as a product manager in your mind need to be clear about, should I be using AI? Because there are cheaper, more deterministic ways of doing it, easier ways of doing it. If I need AI, why are you using it? And then be clear in terms of what the end goal is. And then you have to specify, just like any other product, you have to specify your North Star metrics in terms of business or other things. But AI is ultimately a means to an end. So that principle holds. So that is one fundamental difference between, I would say, traditional product manager and AI. It's basically just general understanding of that. But then there are a few. This might actually be a long answer because we started off with the key point. But then, so just to maybe specify two other points. One is, especially in the current Gen AI world, most of the solutions, so if you're dealing with large language models, these are by nature stochastic, non-deterministic. There is an element of randomness to it. So what this means is how you test them becomes very different, because in the previous world you would basically test and it's like you do this, you get this outcome, test passes. Now there's an element of randomness to it. So if you're thinking of productionizing anything, you have to account for that randomness. You have to basically go through your rounds of testing, but in addition to that, you have to have measures in place for detecting any kind of things like hallucination, any kind of bias, any kind of toxicity during the live conversation. And then you have to have layers in place for post live, like we kind of, in our case, we kind of have models, and we actually have colleagues who scan through the transcripts to look for any detection. So the need for having a feedback loop is ever more critical in the case of an AI product, because there is an undeterministic nature to it. So that's why you always have to kind of account for whether this is there. Also, models built once might not necessarily continue the way. There is an element of data drift that happens. So different user base coming in. So you had trained it on a certain kind of user base in terms of training, and now your user profile has changed for whatever reason. So this model will start giving you worse results. So there's a continuous element of data drift that happens. So the second piece is, be aware of this stochastic nature, have your measures in place to kind of account. So this is the setup in terms of having additional audit models, additional audit layers, and continuous audit layers to be in place. This will not be the case in the case of a traditional software.
Right.
Third piece is potentially, and this is we'll talk about the hallucination and other bits later, but there's an element of compliance,
Yeah.
etc. But the third piece is, I go back to the other popular view is, you need to have a lot of data before you get started with your AI project, otherwise you can't do
Right.
that. Used to be the case, and I'll explain why. So now you have these large language models. These have been pre-trained on a lot of data. So in my previous life, when we used to basically build an NLP product, you had to train the model on, these are my utterances. If the user is saying this, then this is the intent. You had to put in a lot of effort towards training that. Now, because you have these huge models and they've been pre-trained on a large corpus of data, you necessarily don't need that. You could basically start off with a GPT-4 today and have a basic use case up and running. Equally, so now if you're kind of going in, so first of all, there might not be a need for training. You can just using prompt tuning, etc., you can get to the close, at least to your first iteration. Second is, if at all, you now can fine tune a model. So you don't have to build models. You basically have these pre-built models ready, fine tune them, use your elements of additional data to kind of then bring in that. So it's an incremental effort. And now, equally, you have a number of these one-shot models there, which effectively make it less of a problem if you don't have a lot of data. You now also
Yeah.
have models which can generate, you have the options of generating fairly good synthetic data as well. So from that perspective, you are less worried about. So the myth again is like, you have to have a lot of labeled data. It used to be true. You have to have a lot of labeled data. I've been in my life, stuck on many projects where we didn't have data. Now, at least to get started off, that's less of a problem. But nevertheless, it's your job to think about the data, and it's your job as a PM to basically allow for or enable your data science team to kind of get to that right data. Because ultimately, if your data is wrong, then
Yeah,
your model itself
yeah,
is
you're right.
wrong.
You're
So I
right.
would these three aspects of you know what your solution is. Don't worry about the how part of it. Worry on the what and the why. Worry in terms of the realize that an AI product is different from the traditional products in terms of it being stochastic, non-deterministic in nature, and then account for that
Mhm.
in your pipeline and your project setup. And the third part of this would be basically the data part of it.
Yeah. So you're surprising me with two of these parts. The first one is most people would say, okay, these models are very complex, and it's not enough to have an API to, I know, to an open source model or to one of the providers, and we need to really understand it. So that's the one thing that you're saying. No, you just need to understand high level, and what you're saying about the why is not only about how high level to define the work with the model, but the business
Yeah,
requirements are very important. Is it really the best solution? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not worth the effort, and the consumptions afterwards could be risky and cost a lot. So that's the first thing that is
yeah,
surprising. And I have to say that I'm very happy to hear that, because I know if you know, but I created this course for executives. It's an executive
yeah,
program
yeah,
for executives to understand generative AI. And it's always talking about the high level thing, about the business, about the risk, about what you should know. But it's not a technical program, because they need to understand the high level. That's the one
yeah,
thing. And
yeah,
what you said about the data is important too, because most people say, okay, we don't have lots of data and it's not clean and we cannot do anything. The fact that you're saying you could train these models and it could be one shot or a few shots, something which is like very easy to customize. This is
yeah.
another thing. Most people think it's very complex.
Yeah, it is. And again, it's a question of one of the things I would just to add to that. One of the things I would say is again with AI, it's important to get started because you never know what works. And now, at least the starter, getting started problem is solved. You might at some point of time have to kind of go for your data and clean it up, etc. But just to kind of get that first single slice of that MVP out and check whether you are getting the business results. I would plus one the point that you mentioned in terms of the business rules, because ultimately it's a means to an end. We are not doing AI because for the sake of doing AI. You're there to kind of make the life of the customer and the business better. So there, it has to move a business needle, it has to move a customer needle, even if it's like the best model in the world. If it's not moving those needles, you're wasting your time and money. So just get the thin slice out there, use existing models to kind of ratify your solution, and then you can get into the world of fine tuning, or if you have to build a custom model, so be it. But there are enough good high capability, high precision models out there which can get you started. So absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's another thing that is important when you're saying just get started. Most organizations are a bit, I wouldn't say overwhelmed, but they are reluctant to use it
Yeah,
because they are not sure if this is what they need. It could be biased. We talked about hallucinations. How would it look for their PR? Is it like good for them, not good for them? So they are reluctant. And what you're saying is just get started. It's easy to ramp up this kind of a product or a project and see what you get. Just and you learn from the way. You learn if
yeah,
it's good for your customers, and you learn how to do it.
yeah.
Afterwards, you could elaborate your knowledge with additional team or whatever.
Absolutely, and it's basically it's a process, it's a journey. So again, I kind of go back to the work that we've done in Stepstone. We are obviously in the world of job tech. So we started off in 2022. We started off with the hypothesis that job tech, job search is a high emotion activity, a lot of stress involved in that. Can we bring in conversations as a means to kind of provide that emotional support to the user? And although we were entirely convinced, and this is obviously the pre GPT or chat GPT world, but even then we had fairly good NLP models available, and we were convinced that was the case. We actually started off with a human to human chat just to check for the core business case. We said we will put in a human behind the chat, obviously being transparent, and see do people really want to converse with us about a job search. Only if they want to converse with us about a job search will we then bring in AI. So we started off with a human to human. We ratified the use case. Then we brought in the typical, KNN kind of NLP models. And by then we were already experimenting with GPT-3, and then obviously ChatGPT happened. And so now we are kind of in the world of LLMs, where we are now powering these conversations with LLMs. But your loyalty remains to the core business problem that you're solving. AI, we could have somewhere in the journey found out that AI doesn't work, and in which case we would have probably found a different way to do it. But the AI is a means to an end. AI now enables a lot more. So, for instance, this entire concept of being able to cater to a user's emotion probably is not something that would have been possible in the traditional world. But now you can have ChatGPT, or you can have any of these GPT models, or any of the large transform models, fairly good in terms of emotion. It understands, in some cases, it understands sarcasm as well. So just catering, being able to cater and include the emotional aspect in your user experience itself is groundbreaking, because
Yeah.
that's where you're building in the stickiness. That's you're building up the relationship. So this is another aspect that kind of again stands out between a traditional and typical AI piece. But yeah,
Yeah. So we mentioned how easy it is, but let's talk about the other side. What are the biggest challenges that product managers face when they are developing and launching AI products?
um, I would say in my mind again probably three or four. The first one we kind of talked about. It is by definition, or by the core aspect of it. It is non-deterministic. It is stochastic. There is an element of hallucination. I mean, in the case of a traditional software, you click a button, it will do what it's supposed to
Yeah.
do.
And if it
Here,
doesn't do, it's a bug. It's supposed to do
it's a bug.
what you tell
It's a
it.
bug. You
Yeah.
know that you fix this, and this is how it is. Now you click a button. You've trained it up. You've tested it. Chances are it might kind of give you a slightly different version of the page. So there is an element of randomness that is there. So you have to put in the effort. So again, I go back to my current implementations. Previously, in starting off a chat assistant kind of thing, had to put in a lot of effort in terms of training. We actually did not have to put in that effort. But what we had to put in the effort this time with the LLM was a fair amount of iterations to kind of put in the prompts, get the prompt right, give the dynamic static examples, put in the any kind of prompt engineering code behind it, to make sure that the guardrails are there so that the model does not hallucinate. So hallucination is a big problem. You have to counter
Yeah.
that. You have to make sure, because you're not controlling it, you have to make sure that there is no bias in the responses. You have to kind of put in that additional effort for things like bias and toxicity, and basically make sure that the model is trained and has the right set of examples so that it's inclusive in its responses. So I'm talking in this case conversational, but in other cases as well, you would basically have some kind of
Right. Yeah.
non-deterministic element to it. So one is that aspect, which kind of leads to the compliance part of it as well. The second is it is
Just
costly.
maybe before you go to the second one, I just want to make it clear hallucinations mean that you get an answer, you feel that he's very confident, the model says something and he's
Yeah,
very confident, and it's not true. So
yeah,
that's an
true.
hallucination.
Sorry,
That's
I should have, yeah,
hallucination.
clarified. Yeah,
Yeah,
so that's exactly, the model always has a tendency to come back with an answer, and it's mostly where it does not have enough guidance or enough data. It will make something up because it cannot. It has that bias to basically not come back and say, "Hey, don't know," which was a problem previously. So it'll make up answers. That's the hallucination part of it. So you have to make sure that you have covered all those aspects, and it has clear guidance that where data doesn't exist, how it should respond. So that's the hallucination part of it. Toxicity and bias is again where basically, it may, because of the data that has been trained on, it might have a built-in gender bias. It might use certain pronouns. It might use certain things. So you have to make sure that you are kind of countering for all those aspects. So that's
right.
essentially the undeterministic nature, and having to put in the necessary guardrails for that. The
Yeah,
second one is it is costly. It is definitely costlier than a traditional model. Although the costs are now kind of going down. I mean, since GPT three kind of came out, um, obviously the model prices have dropped drastically. But nevertheless, this is an additional compute cost on top of your existing, traditional models that you're bringing in, which is more so the reason why you need to have a solid business case so that the ROI is there, because you have an additional line item. Yes, it's a better experience. Yes, it's more empathetic, but there is an additional cost to it. So cost remains a factor. The second part, or the third part of it, is probably related to this is, at least we are kind of seeing, when it comes down to the real time use cases, there is still element of latencies. Although now you basically through different infrastructures, in terms of various setups, you can reduce the latency, but there is a latency because you're having to make these additional calls, etc., around it. So cost, latency are factors that kind of influence the outcome of, or the experience of it. But the largest problem is probably stakeholder education, which is because um, I can again give a very specific example. We've been trying to kind of we've been trying out a different prompting technique which makes it cheaper, etc. And we are kind of now in our fourth round of testing with that, because there is no certainty that what you will do will actually kind of get you the outcomes. So unlike traditional software where the landscape is known and there is a fair amount of predictability in terms of you do this, you do this, you do this, the outcome is there, and therefore you can commit to a particular deadline. In the case of AI, there are many times it is possible that your solution will take longer than you had anticipated to get to the kind of precision numbers and recall numbers that you're looking at. So again, as a product PM, that is an element of stakeholder management, and also a plan A, plan B, plan C kind of a planning, saying, hey, we're going to time box this, we're going to give this much time, so many iterations. If not, we'll have fallback. So there are going to be elements of pivots, which are going to kind of come in because of this. But allow for that quasi timeline aspect and educate your stakeholders around that piece.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned a few risks. Most people, when they're thinking about an AI product, they're very enthusiastic about the fact that you could talk to it about everything.
Yeah,
And that's a very big risk, especially if you want to present a brand that doesn't want to say something about the competitors, or
yeah,
to present something that you're not aligned with. And this demands a lot of effort from you to try to imagine what the customers would want and say. And afterwards, when you deploy it, to maintain this like maintenance all the time, to
yeah,
understand maybe they're asking something different, and still you need to give a good answer, and you always need to modify it. And the same goes for the risk in the cost, because maybe at the beginning it was like the adoption was very low and it was like 200 people. And when it becomes very popular and people expect it to be part of their experience, it could be very expensive.
spot on. And again, as you talked about it, maintaining, but even the testing cost, because over here now you have to test more. So testing cost is incredibly higher than a traditional piece, because of the non-deterministic nature, you're going through multiple rounds of testing, and that carries cost. These things add up. So absolutely spot on. I think
Yeah.
in agreement.
Yeah, I understand. And another thing, that because this technology, although it's very vast and impressive, it's still young. And all the additional tools you mentioned, Hugging Face or additional platform, they're still not that mature.
Yeah.
And you don't have the transparency that you have in traditional software development and so on.
Absolutely. So there is a difference again, just to build on that point, there's a difference between having chat GPT and an enterprise solution where there is reputation risk, where there is certain responsibilities to your customers. And over there, it is anytime you're trying to do this, there is no playbook available today. You don't know what are the right thresholds. Is a hallucination of X percentage good enough? Is bias of this good enough? So you're kind of getting into this with, you're testing the waters, you're trying to do this, you're trying to obviously continuously optimize. So we are in the very, very nascent stages of using Gen AI solutions. There are, compared to last year, this year there are a number of tools available. Next year there'll be even more. The cost will go down, but we are in the very initial stages of using large language models for enterprise solutions, at least.
Yeah, of course. And we know about cases that, of course, we're talking about bias and ethics, and what about security? And it could be very risky on the cost side. Maybe I heard that there was this company who opened a chat to talk to
Mhm.
their customers, and it was very easy to get all the answers from ChatGPT. So it was like a socket attached to
Yeah,
ChatGPT, and people just misused it and
yeah,
abused this solution and just talked to it, and they needed to pay. And I think that they
yeah.
woke up a bit like too late, and it was like, I don't know,
True,
two
true.
hundred
And
thousand dollars or something
that's
like that.
exactly it. That's exactly it. So I was talking to one of my staff engineers, and we talked about it. Things like, prompt injection, less of a risk. There are risks, and we put in guardrails because you want to be absolutely sure. But it's a risk of someone actually misusing your product for something else that it is not meant for. They come and basically, if you don't put in the
Yeah.
right guardrails, your bills will go up. It's
And more
exactly
than
that.
that, you don't always predict. what would be the misuse, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
in regular software, we know like we have so many years of security products and what is vulnerability? What are the types of vulnerabilities? What are
yeah,
the vulnerabilities that has been used? Now we
yeah,
don't know. Everybody
yeah.
is like a
It's an
first
unknown.
beginner.
It's an unknown. It's definitely an unknown. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some best practices for measuring the success and the impact of an AI product?
I would say it's not very, again, as I go back to my original hypothesis, a product remains a product. So you have to kind of, obviously, you need a very clear understanding of your North Stars. So it doesn't matter whether it's AI driven, which model is driving it, you have to have those metrics in place. Obviously, in addition to that, you have a few additional metrics in terms of, for instance, now you have a new metric that we kind of measure in terms of the naturalness of the conversation. This wouldn't have been the case earlier. So you have your North Star, which is to do with more to do with the business case around it in terms of the core product. Then you would have certain experience related metrics in terms of naturalness and empathy. And then you have your traditional, non-functional aspects in terms of, latency, concurrency, other aspects as well. And then if you are in the realm of where you've kind of got a fine-tuned model, or you're not using an off-the-shelf model, then obviously you're kind of keeping an eye on things like, your precision or your recall and other factors. But by and large, from a PM perspective, you will have there is no getting away from your usual set of metrics. In addition to that, there would be, because you're using an AI solution, you would have these additional aspects of your naturalness or your empathy, or your aspects of, precision, recall. Those aspects would kind of come in. And then
Mhm.
the key bit is exactly as you said, and it's a great point that you made. With the case of an AI product, life actually starts off, the work starts off after you release the product. It's not, you're done and you've shipped and it's done. There's a continuous, auditing and tracking of these metrics, because you always have to keep it in the right range and then retrain if required. But
Right.
these would be the key
Yeah.
set of things that a PM would need to be focused
Yeah,
on.
and I think that another thing that maybe in the future would be considered is the amount of effort you need to continually maintain in order to have good results. Because
Yeah,
right now it's like an additional work that is not challenged and is not like questioned, but each
yeah, it is.
organization doesn't want to work on end in order to
It
get a
is
result.
literally, yeah, it is literally, it's an additional team. So we have a in-house team of conversational analysts and, designers, and they audit our journeys continuously. But if this had been, say, a web form, you would not need that.
Of
But
course,
because now it's a conversation and it's a very good conversation, and you are getting that, the price to pay for that is you need an additional layer. You need an additional effort coming in from the engineering. You need an additional effort coming in from the data scientists as well, in terms of, first of all, keeping the model that you have most accurate, but also now, literally every week, there's a new model coming out, one which is basically 3x, 4x better than the other. So,
right.
designing your solution so that you have swappability of models, and being able to kind of bring that in and quickly do that element of regression test and basically do that quickly is also another factor that kind of is very
Right.
specific. Yeah.
Yeah, and because it's changing so fast, you need to be up to date all the time and change
Yeah.
whatever solution you have.
In the AI world, we were joking about it. In the AI world, you never say in a few years' time. We at best used to say a few quarters' time. Now you're basically saying in a few weeks' time or a
Weeks,
few months' time, this will be possible, because models are coming out
yeah.
fast and so fast.
And
Yeah,
and how do you feel when it's changing so fast? Another thing that is important is the quality as a person and as a product manager to be very flexible and to change really fast because you
it's
don't
a
have
different
any
mindset. It's a very different mindset. If you're someone who's kind of looking for a defined roadmap, for a defined predictability around it, you will struggle. This is more for the agile part of it, and you can't sidestep the change. You have to account for the change. Your design, your work practices, the people you bring in your team have to have that mindset that change is a given. You will pivot, you will be agile, you will make your changes, because anytime a new information appears, you're reacting to it. You are, at least now, probably for a while, you will continuously stay in a discovery mode. There's an element of continuous discovery happening, where, because you're putting something out there, and because the nature is slightly random, you will actually get users kind of almost introduce you to use cases that you had not thought of, because now the user is in control, and they're basically asking some questions or guiding you with some things which which you wouldn't haven't even thought of as a feature, but now you've got a wide canvas. So you it is a different mindset. It is a different mindset. You have to have that resilience. You have to be comfortable with change, at least for a while. I think we'll soon get to that point where this will become, almost, off the shelf. This is everything is a black box. You don't really care whether it's AI or not. There are models with some amount of certainty, and that'll probably happen a few years time. But for now, there is an element of discovery that continues, and so therefore you need to be comfortable. The people that you work with, along with the engineers, the engineering leaders, your PMs, your data scientists, they need to be aware. But it's your job as a product leader to explain why you're changing, and you basically, so the why part of it comes in. So why you're doing this, but you have to account for that change. You have to
Yeah.
build it in.
Yeah, of course. I think that's being comfortable with change is so important in today's
Yeah,
technology where work life is something that you need to think about all the time. And in general, I think that people need to be more flexible in the way that they define what they're doing because
yeah,
it's changing all the time.
yeah,
Another thing that you mentioned is we talked about the feedback loop from the customers and what they're saying to your product and what are the answers and questions in there. Another feedback loop is an internal one
yeah,
from the data science and the UX or someone who's responsible for the experience, and product needs to be aligned all the time with the data. It's not like
yeah.
they're working on it and we don't care. They're
No, no.
asking things that are really relevant for your product, and it's a great way to understand what is the value.
Absolutely. We literally, I mean, obviously we kind of get our customer feedback, but we literally, in my, day-to-day world, we actually have calls three times a week on different products, but it's literally on that product, you're kind of talking to the conversational team to see the kind of feedback that you're getting from them with their spot checks and from the user. You have to, at this stage, when you're dealing with this kind of a technology, you have to really listen, because it's not about, even when you do discovery, it's going to be a very different thing, because most people even don't know what the model is capable of. That's another piece. Most of the people, especially in the chatbot world, they've seen the traditional chatbots. They don't even realize that this bot is that smart. So you have to, at this stage, you have to be you have to keep your ears to what the user is saying, and equally, as you said, your data scientists, your internal team giving you the feedback, and then accounting for those changes in your roadmap.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's all
And
about the
that
feedback loop. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important that it's not that easy today because you don't have these platforms aggregating this data. It's manually done right now, and you don't have like in the past we had so many monitoring
Yeah.
opportunities and tools, and now you need to really go through these conversations and see
Yeah.
what's inside
Yeah.
it.
And it's exactly that. So basically, it's like the typical software of a couple of decades back when it was in the initial nascent stage. Now it's matured. You have entire organizations who have their revenue stream coming from these telemetry. And this will happen. This will happen in the case of AI products as well. There are many startups that are working on that, but it's in the initial stages. Absolutely.
So, what advice would you give to aspiring AI product managers who are just starting their career?
Um, I would say know why. Again, I would kind of come. So, first of all, I would say go down to the first principles. So, and by first principles, again, at the beginning of the call, what I was basically saying is try and understand what all can AI help you with. Um, it is, I understand it's kind of a bit of fad. It's probably going to become a necessity as well to be AI literate, because soon everything will have an element of AI. But be clear in terms of, if you as a PM are clear and you're kind of thinking in terms of first principles, in terms of the what and the why when it comes down to AI, that is essential. In terms of, don't dive straight into, oh, I want to basically, learn Python programming, and I want to basically understand these models, and I want to build models, and I want to train models. That, I would say, is a nice to have. The need to have is, it's ultimately a new toolkit that we as PMs have. We now can extend a very different experience to your user. You now have a very different way of segmentation. You now have a very different way of basically enabling certain decisions in terms of, making a prediction, or doing some kind of classification. So I would say, there are a number of good, I would say, before you kind of dive into any kind of technical course, there are a number of these fundamental courses, which kind of talk about executives, which talk about a PM level know-how. Unfortunately, most of them, and it's really heartening to hear from you, Adi, that you're not pushing for the technical piece. Most of the product PM courses that I've seen actually start off with training models, which is in my mind not the right
Yeah,
thing. So
they're too technological in that
yeah,
sense.
too technological in that sense, and you don't need that. Even at some point of time, even the data scientists, we are now living in the era of co-pilots. Even your engineers probably don't need to understand this. There is a lot that is going to become available. So I think my advice to the aspiring AI product managers would be understand the first principles, understand why, and understand what all would you need to own the what and the why for the AI product. Don't worry about the how part of it. Be aware of it. Be aware of the issues around how and the other implementation part of it. Know what a pipeline would look like and educate your users around it. But essentially, be aware of the core fundamentals. Go for these initial fun, basically high level courses, understanding AI, understanding what you're doing, and find a way to link it to the work that you're doing in terms of how does my decision making, how does my user experience, can it become better if I bring in AI? Which needle will it move? If you're able to do that, you're probably on the right path.
Yeah. Another thing that is important to remember that it's just the beginning.
It's
Because
yeah,
what we see right now, as I see it, I have one chapter about UX for AI because I come from design products. So this is how I see it. And for me, it's like we're in a DOS era. It's
yeah,
just the beginning. We don't have all the interfaces and all the best guidelines in order to
yeah,
create these products. And everybody thinks that generative AI is just a chat. It's a very sophisticated
no,
chat and it's just a chat, but it's
yeah,
just the beginning. You need to know that the potential is so much more
yeah.
vast.
What actually ChatGPT has done is it has provided an interface layer for accessing data, which is far more intelligent. It has kind of taken the need away from user education or those elements. But as you said, this is just the beginning. We don't know. We are living in the world of multimodal. We are living in the world of, augmented reality, virtual reality. These are all interfaces that will come in. UI as you know it will change. UX as you know it will change. Even the backend engine in terms of decision making, in terms of those things will change. So we are I mean, if you take a step back and you think about it, it is quite likely that the way software will get built in 5 years from now will be very different. I mean,
Yeah,
that sounds like a very profound statement, but it is quite true. It might just happen in a very, very different way. So yes,
yeah,
we are in the very, very early stages. We've not even scratched the surface. There's a
yeah.
lot more that's possible.
I agree. You mentioned multimodal, meaning the interface could understand text and voice and images and
Yeah,
video. So you can just imagine that if this model understands the way I talk and how I look and what's my surrounding, it gets so much more from the senses.
yeah,
We have so many senses. We have five or six, and it will get the same way to understand
inputs.
the world.
Yeah, I mean, even expressions. So I'm here, I'm kind of smiling, I'm doing this. So I will use a different tone. This person is calling me, is looking worried, is looking depressed. I will use a different tone, just the way humans would perceive it.
Right.
The tonality of your voice, your expressions, all those factors are available, are becoming available. It is up to you to decide. And just because it's available doesn't mean that you rush into it. It's up to you to decide whether it will add value to your product. And if it is, now it suddenly is available. If it does not, go for it. I would say again, I would actually say to the PMs, avoid AI if you can. If there is a cheaper, easier way to get to your results, start off with that. Go with a deterministic solution. Go with a cheaper solution if that helps you move the needles. Only if this is the kind of goal that you have, then go down this route, because again, it's not that easy. It's costly and there's a lot of effort into it.
Right, right. And I think that what we talked about, this flexibility is flexible to the way that you're doing what you're doing, to understand that it's going to change, and the way that you perceive the world and technology in general is going to be
Yeah,
very different.
true. Adaptability, I don't know if it was Sam or someone. Basically, that is the core skill, because the world as we know it will change. Only if you're able to be very clear in terms of what you want to do it, but not be worried about the how, and be more flexible with that. That's the way to adaptability more than anything else is probably the core skill at this stage.
Yeah, and I think because it's just the beginning of these models and what they can do, and they're very separate and they're not always aligned, and sometimes you need a few models, open source, in order to integrate what you need. In general, it's just an understanding that the way that we perceive the world as humans is going to change, and the way these models would perceive our world is going to change, and the interaction between the two is going to change.
Yeah, and that itself, I mean, it's so it's so profound and it's scary equally, but that remains an open question for us as a race, that we don't know what the future holds in terms of the human AI interaction when AI is at a certain level of maturity. That remains an open question. We are at that big an inflection point, but equally we are at a point where probably skill, as you know it, definition of skill changes. Maybe the skill is not that at some point of time the skill is the how, at some point the skill becomes the domain knowledge, so you're able to guide it. But at some point, the skill probably is how well can you instruct a model. That becomes the skill, because the model itself now has the basic how part of it. It has been trained on all the domain knowledge. It can actually, where a human, medical practitioner can correlate between five comorbidities or something like that. This can actually scan 150 and come up with that. So even the domain is there, and at that point of time, it is how efficiently can you leverage this technology to get the outcome that you're looking for. That then becomes the skill set. Can you talk to a model? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, a great example would be development, coding.
Yeah.
Right now, we have like coders, engineers using these tools in order to get some of the low-level components into their code. But as these models get elaborated and more efficient and smarter, they would do more and more of the coding work. And in the end, we might have someone saying like, we have this feature, this is definition, go ahead and just build it,
Yeah.
more or less.
Yeah. I think there was a headline somewhere I kind of read. At some point, you might have a single person unicorn, because you actually, all you need is the person to know what they want, and you could actually have everything else automated.
Yeah, I
It
think that
right
Sam
from,
Altman mentioned
yeah,
something. I
yeah,
think he mentioned like 10 people doing a unicorn, something like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
This is what he
yeah.
mentioned.
It
And
is
it
quite
makes
likely.
sense because all these tools for marketing, for product, for coding, for sales, for everything that you need would be these agents that would do
Yeah,
the work of
yeah,
people.
yeah. And then it's agents talking to agents, getting it done. It's how smart your agent is. Maybe your competitive advantage is the how smart and how up to date your agents are, because then they're kind of getting the best deal for you, or the best negotiation for you, or best outcome for you. That becomes the
Yeah.
competitive advantage.
Yeah. We have a question for the audience.
Okay.
Thanks, Tanvir, for joining us, Tanvir Hussain. Great points. Considering the non-deterministic nature of AI, how do the traditional use cases have to be adapted? Also, can AI help generate further use cases?
So let me answer the easier one first, which so it's a great question. Can AI help generate future further use cases? Yes, and because I think now the canvas of your definition of a user experience has changed. You can bring in emotion, you can bring in voice, you can bring in video. So there are a lot more use cases in terms of where it many a times it probably is not enough to just have an interface or even chat. You might actually require the person, say you're assessing someone for a certain skill set, you would want to kind of converse with that person, you want to see their body language and those kind of things. So AI definitely has enabled a lot more new use cases, which is possible across all these pieces. The traditional use cases, I think ultimately there will be an element of adaptability that comes in, because again I go back to my first principle. The use case existed because of a certain means to an end. Today you are basically achieving that means using traditional software in terms of whatever it is, kind of thing. If that need exists, then those traditional softwares would initially probably you're going to pepper them with some elements of predictability, etc., etc. But at some point of time, there's probably going to be a complete overhaul where you maybe just, again, this is, we are all future gazing over here, but maybe there's a future exists that you don't have a website, you have these smart things, and there is all you're doing is talking to an agent. You basically would have a LinkedIn agent who can basically, you can talk to and say, hey, what's the useful thing, or can you tell me about this thing, as opposed to going to a website. So there is going to be a sea change in the traditional use cases. The need still remains the same. You still want to be connected to people. So that fundamental remains, but how you adapt the implementation of your traditional use case will change.
I think that another thing we were talking about these agents, and like half a year ago, OpenAI talked about agents talking together.
Yeah.
Just imagine that this agent that you talk to know that there is another task. He's building himself another new agent that
Yeah.
could create the answer for the new task that is generated. If you're building something for entrepreneurs to discuss and understand their use case for a product, you
Yeah.
could get a new additional
You,
ideas from these models
we
too.
we see that. So even our setup that we've got, so the job search companion that we've built is actually nothing but a multi-agent setup, and you have different agents, you're basically trying to kind of do certain functions. But we've actually seen where the model knows that this particular tool exists, and in order to respond to a particular user, it actually itself uses that tool to answer it. So there is an element, because it's been trained that way, so it will use all possible means. And if it means at some point it basically is kind of and it sounds scary as well, but at some point it might be a point where it basically builds its own tools to cater to the end need. So
Right.
in terms of the traditional use cases, they will have to be adopted, because there is that competitive advantage in terms of the user experience and the business benefit unlocking that needs to be done. I think it will ultimately be driven by the economics of it. This will, as always, this will drive that adoption. Initially there might be certain parts of it, but eventually there will be a complete switchover.
Yeah.
That would be
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
guess.
I think it has to be adapted, because if not, we're taking a very vast and powerful tool and trying to make it the same as the older tools.
Yeah.
It's like taking ChatGPT and building a very, very small chat that you could do manually, like in the past. But
Yeah.
if you would not be flexible, you just
And that's
exercise
actually,
these
it's
tools.
it's a great point you make, because this is again something that I've observed as well. Many times the engineers, because they are kind of focused on, they are used to building it in a certain way, they will put in so many guardrails for the LLM to make it deterministic. It almost becomes very much like a deterministic software. That's where the right balance needs to come in, because you want to kind of leverage the naturalness of the model compared to any other
Right.
traditional software.
Yeah. Thanks for the questions, Tanvir. And we're almost done, and I have like a few more questions. Um, Looking ahead, the future
Mhm.
trends and opportunities that you see emerging for AI products, like for your product, and
Yeah,
what are you seeing the next steps?
I would say, and this is the term future becomes very relevant thing in terms of AI, because many times future is now. But I would say the emerging trends, I would say one is, we talked about it, multimodal experience will happen. The other thing which I think will happen is you will have a multi-language experience. Because now language, the model is capable of multiple languages. You're not restricted to some part of it. So the localization in terms of language would happen. I think we will see the emergence. There would be one part of it where we continue to build these generic AGI kind of world, but there is going to be another one where you're basically almost creating domain specific models. So there would be, think of it as ChatGPT for aeronautics, or ChatGPT for, not ChatGPT, but some models which have been built specifically for healthcare, for one particular niche. So you will have these niche use cases, but you will have specialized enterprise models being built. So you'll move away from the generic. It will not know who Shakespeare is, but it'll basically know, what a protein structure looks like, blah, 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 those kind of things. So the emergence of specialized models would be the second thing. And I think the third thing that will happen, and it's already started off, is you will actually have, just like we had computing at the edge, you will have AI at the edge. You will have smaller purpose-built models available in your local devices, handheld devices. So you'll start seeing AI becoming more available in the periphery, rather than just being a central piece part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this one is an easy one to predict in terms of up until this. Beyond this, I don't know, but you will definitely see multimodal, multi-language, specific models come up, and you will basically see it happening more peripherally
Yeah.
in terms of the
Another thing
periphery.
that is important to say, if it's a specific or very small, or in the end, like meaning in your mobile device, it means that it consumes less energy, that it's lighter, that it's easier to deploy, or even it doesn't cost that much because it's not a heavy procedure you
And
need
even
to
from a
for
data privacy
question.
perspective, all your data stays within your particular device. So this is now continuously getting trained in terms of how you behave, what does your flick mean, those kind of things. So I think you will see a lot of emergence of that, whether it's a whether the peripheral devices stays in the form factor for mobile phone or something else, we don't know, but you will start seeing AI in available in the periphery a
Yeah.
lot more.
Another thing that needs to be like in the future is the hardware. This is why
Yeah,
NVIDIA is so successful right now, because we need the chips that would do all these operations for
yeah.
these devices.
Yeah, and we already, so when you're talking about that hardware becoming prominent, you also now will see the emergence, and we're already seeing the emergence of these the robos coming in terms of whether it's again in the human form factor or otherwise. But now you have the compute, you have the ability to make a particular device more intelligent, and now you will basically see hardware pick up in terms of whether it's just pure mechanics or whether it is basically pure computing hardware as well. So
Right.
yeah.
Eh, just imagine how exciting it could be, or frightening, depends on what size what side you're taking. So what is your number one tip for entrepreneurs today?
This has always been the case. Every time someone comes to me with an idea saying I want to build it, I want to do a start a company. My first advice is don't do it. Don't do it.
Don't
Why?
do it.
Don't do it. Why? Because it's hard.
It's the funniest tip that I ever
Yeah.
had in
Don't
my
do it.
show.
Don't do it because it's very hard. It's not an easy thing. In order to kind of get to your product market fit, you will need to stay with the idea for at least 3 to 5 years, and then from there on, once it is successful, the journey of the scale up starts off. So only go for it if you absolutely think that that's the only thing you can do and you're meant to do. The passion, the drive has to be very, very strong. Otherwise, it's not an easy thing to do. It sounds very nice. It sounds very easy, but it is a very, very tough piece. So persistence, a different way of putting it is basically persistence is probably the core skill. But question yourself, 10 times, 15 times when you do it. You need to be slightly illogical to kind of go down in terms of starting a venture, because there is no rationale to it. So you have to be that element, the passion has to be there, because that is the only thing that will keep you throughout your journey.
Yeah, I think that most people, when they, I think that I heard it from the entrepreneur in NVIDIA. He said he never imagined that it's going to be so hard
Yeah,
to do what he meant to do.
yeah. And the other thing is, probably don't even start off with, I'm going to make a unicorn. If you have that goal every day till the time you get to the unicorn, you're not succeeding. So don't have that as the goal. Have a very small goal in terms of problem to solve, because that will then kind of give you the quick wins that you're going for. If you're basically saying, hey, I'm going to build the next big thing in AI, by definition, you set yourself up for failure. So start off with a very clear goal, know why you're doing it, know that you can give it the time and the energy to stay with it for a while. If all those answers are there, and you will get to a point where you will just know that you have no other option but to do the startup. It is going to be an internal thing that kind of comes in. You will feel so strongly about a solution, you will be so frustrated that a solution doesn't exist to this problem, that you'll have to take the dive. That's when I think is the right time to kind of go for that venture.
Yeah. I think it's a very unique characteristics for someone who needs to be an entrepreneur. As you said,
Yeah.
it needs to be a bit crazy in
Yeah,
order to
you
do
need to be
it.
crazy. The crazy gene has to be there. Otherwise, it'll not. You're defining all odds. You're basically saying, I can actually come up with a solution when a solution doesn't exist, and I can create a venture and I can support multiple families with that. That is an immense amount of self confidence, and it cannot be logical. There has to be a almost like a illogical self belief that drives you.
Yeah. It's I have one of my talks. I usually talk in front of people with lots of like talks, and one of them is the characteristics you need in order to be an entrepreneur. And
Yeah,
I take like a five or six main ones, and one of it is like you need to be a bit like a narcissist, that
yeah,
you define yourself
yeah,
and the world, and nobody could move you from that. It's like
yeah.
you need to really be sure that what you're thinking is the right truth.
It is,
If
and
not,
again, here's the logical part of this hypothesis. If you stay long enough, everyone there are so many diverse people. There have to be a few people who are looking for the solution that you've built. but you have to stay long enough to identify that segment and then build on it. There are users out there, you just have to find it, and it's not going to happen in day one. It's not going to happen. You will go through multiple pivots, you will have to keep adapting, but you'll get to that point where you finally find the product market fit, and from there on it takes off. But yeah, it has to, you have to have that self-belief saying I can do it, and I'm meant to do it. There's that element of I'm meant to do it.
Yeah, which is like a bit like a prophet or something,
Yeah,
that you believe that I'm
yeah,
the person in the right
yeah,
place in the right time.
yeah, yeah.
Is That's
It's
interesting.
amazing.
Yeah, thank you for being with me,
Well,
Somnath. It's been a pleasure and really interesting to talk to you.
thank you, Adi. I've enjoyed the discussion. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
And
being here.
where could people hear you more and meet you and see more about your work?
I think I'm most active. I'm not actually active on Facebook or X. I'm most active on LinkedIn. So I think LinkedIn would be the best place to reach out if there is anything that I can help with, guide around. I would be happy to do that.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks. And to all of
Thanks,
you
Adi.
change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And if you find this episode valuable, insightful, I invite you to share it. And you could check out my new executive program. It's part of my website. And thank you. See you in another
Cool.
innovative, insightful talk soon. See ya.
Bye bye.
That's it. How was it?
Oh, I loved it. Thank you. Thank you. Great questions. I think it was a very good discussion. Was it useful for you? Did I kind of cover all the
Yeah,
aspects?
yeah. I think that the main things that I wanted to cover were there, and I think that the fact we went to different directions, not exactly what we wanted, was really interesting for me, and I hope that people will find it like
Yeah.
interesting.
Let's
And
let's see.
afterwards, I take like bits of it and have people don't have in
Time
most
to go
cases
through the
the
entire thing.
energy
Yeah.
to see it
Yeah.
all, so I'm taking the clips out,
Yeah.
and it's available in the podcast too, so people was like driving or cleaning, they
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
an opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
So I
No,
hope
thank
it's
you.
okay.
Adi, really, I genuinely enjoyed the discussion because I think this is, as you was rightly saying, we are in the very early stages of this topic, and the more you discuss it, the more aspects and more thought process come out, and it helps you with your thinking as well. So, thank you.
Sure,
Really, really enjoyed it.
sure. So have a great day. I'll send
You
you,
too.
you have already the links to the live if you want it, and
Yeah,
when I have the podcast, it's going to be live in the channel.
I'll put it with that. Cool. All
Have
right.
a great day.
Thanks, Adi.
See ya.
Take care. All the
Have a
best.
great
Bye.
day. See
Bye.
ya. Bye bye.
Bye.